The fluorescent orange ticket fluttered against Maria Santos's windshield, like a dying butterfly. Its harsh color, a stark contrast to the gentle morning light filtering through the oak trees of Meadowbrook Commons. She sat in her modified Honda Civic, staring at the citation through the driver's side window, her hands trembling slightly as they gripped the steering wheel. The ticket bore a timestamp of 6:47 a.m., meaning someone had been out patrolling the parking lot before most residents had even awakened. Maria had lived in the suburban community for 8 years, ever since her accident had left her with limited mobility in her left leg. The designated handicapped parking spaces had been her lifeline, allowing her to maintain her independence and continue working as a part-time librarian at the local elementary school. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers struggling with the touchscreen as she called her neighbor, David Chen. "David, did you get one too?" she asked when he answered, her voice tight with anxiety. "Get what?" David's voice was groggy with sleep. "Maria, it's not even 7 in the morning." "A parking ticket. On my car. In the handicapped spot." Maria took a shaky breath. "It says my permit is invalid." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, then the sound of David's wheelchair moving across his hardwood floors. "Hold on. Let me check my van." Maria waited, watching as other residents began to emerge from their townhomes. Morning routines interrupted by the same orange violations that had awakened her. Mrs. Patterson, who used a walker after her hip replacement, stood beside her sedan, looking confused and distressed. Tom Rodriguez, a veteran who had lost his right arm in Afghanistan, was already on the phone, his voice rising with each word. "I've got one too," David said when he returned to the phone. "And so does Mrs. Chen next door. This doesn't make sense. Maria, our permits are all current." By 8 o'clock, 17 disabled residents had discovered identical citations on their vehicles. The tickets were signed by someone named Karen Muller, identified as HOA Compliance Officer, a title none of them had heard before. The violations all carried the same cryptic message: disability parking permit, no longer recognized under new community standards. Contact HOA Office for resolution. Maria had always found comfort in the predictable rhythms of Meadowbrook Commons. The community had been designed with accessibility in mind, featuring wide sidewalks, gentle slopes, and ample handicapped parking near the mailboxes, community center, and playground. When she'd moved in, the HOA president, Jennifer Walsh, had personally walked her through the accommodations, ensuring she felt welcome and supported. But Jennifer had moved away 6 months ago, and the new HOA board had been elected in a contentious vote that many disabled residents had missed due to the meeting being held in the community center's upstairs room, which was only accessible by a narrow staircase. The new president was a woman named Rebecca Stone, who had campaigned on a platform of community beautification and property value enhancement. David wheeled his chair up to Maria's car as she was examining the ticket more closely. His salt and pepper beard was unkempt, and his usually bright eyes were clouded with worry. "I called the HOA office. They said we need to attend an emergency meeting tonight at 7. "In the upstairs room again?" Maria asked, already knowing the answer. "That's what they said. I asked about accommodation, and the secretary just said to figure it out." David's voice carried a bitter edge that Maria had never heard before. Tom Rodriguez approached them, his left hand clutching his phone. "I just got off the phone with the city. They confirmed that our permits are all valid. This Karen Muller woman has no authority to declare them invalid." "Then why are we getting these tickets?" Mrs. Patterson had joined their impromptu gathering, her walker creating small scraping sounds on the asphalt. "Because someone wants us gone," Tom said grimly. "Think about it. All the prime parking spots, closest to the amenities. If they can get rid of us, they can convert those spaces to regular parking." The meeting that evening was held in the community center. But true to form, the HOA had not arranged any accommodations for disabled residents. David had to recruit 2 neighbors to help carry his wheelchair up the stairs, while Mrs. Patterson stood outside, unable to navigate the steps with her walker. Maria's leg throbbed with each step, and by the time she reached the meeting room, she was struggling to hide her discomfort. Rebecca Stone stood at the front of the room, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, her crisp white blouse and navy blazer giving her the appearance of a corporate executive. Beside her sat Karen Miller, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses, holding a thick folder of documents. "Thank you all for coming," Rebecca began, her voice carrying a practiced authority. "We've called this meeting to address some concerns about parking violations and to discuss new community standards that will help maintain our property values." "What new standards?" David called out from his position near the back of the room. "And who is this Karen Mueller? I've never seen her before." Rebecca's smile was thin and cold. "Ms. Mueller is our new compliance officer, hired to ensure that all residents are following community guidelines. As for the standards, we've conducted a thorough review of our parking policies and found several irregularities." Karen Miller stood up, consulting her folder. "After careful examination, we've determined that several so-called handicapped permits in our community are either expired, fraudulent, or being used by individuals who don't meet our community's definition of disabled." The room erupted in angry voices. Maria felt her heart racing as she stood up, her leg sending sharp pains up her spine. "My permit is issued by the state of California and is completely valid. You have no authority to override state law." "Actually, we do," Rebecca interjected smoothly. "Our community covenants give us broad authority to regulate parking. We're not invalidating your state permits, but we are establishing our own standards for what constitutes a legitimate disability within our community." "That's illegal," Tom shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. "You can't just decide who's disabled and who isn't." Karen Miller adjusted her glasses. "We're not making arbitrary decisions. We've developed a comprehensive evaluation process. Each resident with a handicapped permit will need to undergo an assessment with our contracted medical professional to determine if they truly require special parking accommodations." "An assessment." Mrs. Patterson's voice was barely audible from where she stood at the bottom of the stairs. "I had my hip replaced. I have hardware in my leg. What more assessment do you need?" Rebecca's expression remained unchanged. "Mrs. Patterson, hip replacements are quite common these days. Many people function normally after such procedures. We need to ensure that parking accommodations are reserved for those who truly need them." The meeting continued for another hour, with Rebecca and Karen Mueller presenting their new standards while fielding increasingly heated questions from the disabled residents and their supporters. The assessment process, they explained, would cost each resident $200 and would be conducted by Dr. Harrison Webb, a physician contracted by the HOA. Any resident who refused the assessment or failed to meet the new criteria would lose their parking privileges and face daily fines of $50. As the meeting broke up, Maria found herself surrounded by her neighbors, all of them shaken by what they had heard. "This is discrimination, plain and simple," David said, his voice tight with anger. "They're trying to price us out of our own homes." "What do we do?" asked Sarah Kim, a young mother with multiple sclerosis who used a cane on her bad days. "I can't afford a $200 assessment, and I definitely can't afford $50 a day in fines." Tom Rodriguez had been quiet during the walk down the stairs, but now he spoke with the measured tone of someone who had seen conflict before. "We fight, we organize, and we make sure everyone knows what they're trying to do here." Over the next week, the situation escalated rapidly. Karen Mueller began conducting daily parking patrols, issuing citations to any vehicle with a handicapped permit that hadn't scheduled an assessment. The tickets came with increasingly aggressive language, and some residents reported being photographed and questioned about their disabilities while entering and leaving their vehicles. Maria received her second citation on a Tuesday morning as she was leaving for work. This time, Karen Mueller was waiting beside her car, clipboard in hand and a small digital camera hanging from her neck. "Ms. Santos, I notice you're still parking in the handicap zone despite receiving a violation notice." Maria paused, her hand on the car door. "This is my legal parking spot. I have a valid permit." "Not according to our new standards. I've been observing you for several days, and I've noticed that you walk quite well. Your disability appears to be minimal." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. "You don't know anything about my condition. I've had 3 surgeries on my leg, and I'm in constant pain." Karen Mueller made a note on her clipboard. "Pain is subjective. Ms. Santos, what we need is objective evidence of functional limitation. I see you walking to your car, getting in and out without assistance, driving normally. These don't indicate significant disability. I use a handicapped permit because walking long distances is excruciating. The doctor said I should avoid unnecessary strain on my leg." "Well, that's exactly the kind of thing Dr. Webb will evaluate in your assessment. I have you scheduled for next Friday at 2 o'clock. The fee is due at the time of service." Maria felt tears of frustration building in her eyes. "I work on Friday afternoons. I can't just take time off for some fake assessment." "That's your choice, Ms. Santos. But until you complete the assessment, you'll continue to receive citations. And if you accumulate more than 5 violations, we'll have your vehicle towed." The threat of towing proved to be more than just posturing. That weekend, David Chen discovered that his modified van had been impounded overnight. The towing company, contacted by the HOA, had arrived at 2 a.m. and removed the vehicle from the handicapped parking space, where David had parked it legally for 8 years. "They took my van," David told Maria over the phone, his voice breaking. "My modified van with the wheelchair lift. How am I supposed to get to work? How am I supposed to get groceries?" The towing company, it turned out, was owned by Karen Mueller's brother-in-law. To retrieve his vehicle, David would need to pay $200 in towing fees, plus $50 per day for storage, plus schedule and pay for his mandatory assessment. The total cost was already approaching $400, money that David didn't have. Maria drove to David's house that morning, finding him sitting in his wheelchair on his front porch, staring at the empty parking space where his van had been. "I called in sick to work," he said without looking up. "First time in 6 years. I don't know what else to do." "We're not letting them get away with this," Maria said, though she wasn't sure how they could fight back. "This is illegal. It has to be." That afternoon, Tom Rodriguez called an emergency meeting of the disabled residents at his apartment. Unlike the HOA meeting, this gathering was held on the ground floor, with Tom rearranging his furniture to accommodate wheelchairs and walkers. 12 residents attended, representing nearly every disabled person in the community. "I've been researching," Tom began, spreading papers across his coffee table. "What they're doing violates the Fair Housing Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and probably half a dozen state laws. But we need legal help." Sarah Kim raised her hand tentatively. "I have a cousin who's a lawyer, but she does family law. She might know someone who handles disability rights cases." "I'll call her tonight," Tom said, making a note. "In the meantime, we need to document everything. Every ticket, every interaction with Karen Muller, every threat. We need to build a case." Mrs. Patterson, who had been quiet throughout the meeting, suddenly spoke up. "I scheduled my assessment for tomorrow. I don't have the money for fines, and I'm scared they'll tow my car too." "Don't go alone," Maria said immediately. "I'll drive you. And Tom, maybe you should come too, as a witness." The next day, the three of them arrived at Dr. Webb's office, which was located in a strip mall 20 minutes from their community. The office was on the second floor, accessible only by a narrow staircase with no elevator. Mrs. Patterson took one look at the stairs and shook her head. "I can't make it up there with my walker." Tom was already on his phone, calling the office. "Yes, I'm calling about accommodations for disabled patients. You're on the second floor with no elevator access." He listened for a moment, then hung up. "They said they don't provide accommodations because they're assessing people's ability to navigate normal environments." Maria felt a cold anger building in her chest. This is intentional. They're setting up barriers to prevent us from even getting assessed. When they returned to the community, Karen Mueller was waiting in the parking lot with her clipboard and camera. "Mrs. Patterson, you missed your appointment. That's an additional violation." "Your doctor's office isn't accessible," Tom said flatly. Mrs. Patterson couldn't get up the stairs with her walker. Karen Mueller made a note. "The ability to navigate standard architectural features is part of the assessment. If Mrs. Patterson can't climb stairs, that suggests her disability is more severe than indicated by her permit." "More severe?" Mrs. Patterson's voice was barely a whisper. "What does that mean?" "It means you might need to consider whether this community is the right fit for your needs. We have standards here." The breaking point came 3 days later. Maria was returning from work when she saw Karen Muller's car parked in the handicapped space closest to the mailboxes. The woman was sitting in her silver BMW, engine running, while she filled out paperwork. Maria parked in a regular space and walked over, her leg aching with each step. "Excuse me, that's a handicapped parking space." Karen Mueller looked up from her clipboard. "I'm conducting official HOA business. I need to be positioned where I can observe the parking situation." "You don't have a handicapped permit." "I don't need one. I'm an HOA official." Maria felt something snap inside her. "You're harassing disabled residents, stealing our parking spaces, and making our lives miserable. This ends now." Karen Muller's smile was cold. "Actually, Ms. Santos, this is just the beginning. Your assessment is overdue, and you've accumulated 7 violations. I'm having your car towed tonight." That evening, Maria called Tom Rodriguez with a plan. "I'm not going to let them tow my car. I'm going to sleep in it if I have to." "You're not doing this alone," Tom said. "I'll be there too, and I'm calling everyone else." By 10 o'clock, 8 disabled residents had gathered in the parking lot, some sitting in their cars, others in lawn chairs brought from their homes. David's neighbors had loaned him a manual wheelchair so he could participate, and Mrs. Patterson had convinced her son to drive her over. The scene was both heartbreaking and inspiring a small group of people with disabilities, many of them elderly, staging a quiet protest against discrimination. Rebecca Stone arrived at 11, accompanied by Karen Muller and a uniformed security guard. "This is trespassing," she announced. "You're creating a disturbance." "We're sitting in our own parking lot," Tom replied calmly. "The same parking lot we've been using legally for years." "Not anymore. These spaces are being converted to regular parking effective immediately." The security guard, who appeared uncomfortable with the situation, approached Tom. "Sir, I need to ask you to move along." "I'm not moving," Tom said firmly. "This is legal parking, and I have every right to be here." Maria watched the standoff with growing anxiety. The security guard was clearly reluctant to physically remove disabled residents, but Rebecca Stone was becoming increasingly agitated. "Call the police," she ordered. "Have them arrested for trespassing." "Ma'am, these people live here," the guard said quietly. "I'm not sure this constitutes trespassing." Karen Muller stepped forward. "They're violating community standards and disrupting the peace. Remove them." The police arrived 20 minutes later, two officers who seemed as confused as the security guard. After talking to both sides, they concluded that no crime had been committed and left without making any arrests. Rebecca Stone was furious, but there was nothing she could do except retreat to her townhouse, promising that this wasn't over. The vigil continued until dawn. As the sun rose over Meadowbrook Commons, the exhausted group of disabled residents felt a small sense of victory. They had stood their ground, and they had shown the community that they wouldn't be quietly pushed aside. But the victory was short-lived. Over the weekend, while the residents were attending Tom's nephew's wedding, someone had painted over the handicapped parking symbols on the asphalt. Without the painted symbols, the spaces were no longer legally designated as handicapped parking, and Karen Muller wasted no time in issuing new citations. Maria discovered the change on Monday morning when she was leaving for work. Where the familiar wheelchair symbol had been painted, there was now only fresh black asphalt. She stood in the parking lot, staring at the erased symbols, feeling as though a part of her identity had been literally painted over. David wheeled up beside her, his face grim. "They did it to all of them. Every single handicapped space." "This is war," Maria said quietly. "They're not just taking our parking spaces. They're trying to erase us completely." That same day, Tom Rodriguez received a call from Sarah Kim's cousin, the family lawyer. "I've been in touch with a disability rights attorney in Los Angeles," she had said. "Her name is Jessica Martinez, and she's very interested in your case." Jessica Martinez arrived at Tom's apartment that Thursday evening, a small woman in her 40s, with graying hair and intense brown eyes. She listened to the residents' stories with growing amazement and anger, taking detailed notes and asking pointed questions about the HOA's actions. "What they're doing is so blatantly illegal that I'm surprised they haven't been sued already," she said after hearing the full account. "This violates federal fair housing laws, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and several state statutes. But more importantly, it's morally reprehensible." "Can you help us?" Mrs. Patterson asked, her voice hopeful for the first time in weeks. "I can do more than help you. I can make sure this never happens to anyone else." Jessica's smile was fierce. "I'm going to file a class action lawsuit, and I'm going to make sure it gets national attention. This story needs to be told. Within days, Jessica had filed a comprehensive lawsuit against the HOA, Rebecca Stone, Karen Miller, and Dr. Webb. The complaint alleged violations of the Fair Housing Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and several state laws protecting disabled individuals from discrimination. But more importantly, Jessica had contacted the media. The story broke on a Tuesday morning when a reporter from the local television station arrived at Meadowbrook Commons with a camera crew. Within hours, the parking lot was filled with news vans, reporters, and cameras. The story of the HOA's campaign against disabled residents spread rapidly across social media, generating outrage and support from around the country. Maria found herself thrust into the spotlight as one of the lead plaintiffs in the lawsuit, standing in front of the cameras, her leg throbbing from the stress and activity. She spoke about the impact of the HOA's actions on her daily life. "This isn't just about parking spaces," she said, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "This is about whether disabled people have the right to live in their own communities with dignity and respect. We're not asking for special treatment. We're asking for basic human decency." The interviews were powerful, but the most compelling moment came when David Chen demonstrated how he had been forced to navigate the community without his van. With his neighbor's help, he transferred from his wheelchair to the loaner manual chair, showing the cameras how difficult it was for him to travel even short distances without his modified vehicle. "My van isn't just transportation," he explained, breathing heavily from the effort of moving himself. "It's my independence. Without it, I'm trapped in my own home." The story gained national attention when it was picked up by a major network news program. The segment featured interviews with all the affected residents, hidden camera footage of Karen Mueller's aggressive tactics, and commentary from disability rights advocates. The reporter had also uncovered additional troubling information. Karen Mueller had been hired by the HOA, despite having no formal training in compliance or disability law. And Dr. Webb had a history of providing questionable medical evaluations for insurance companies. But the most damning revelation came when the reporter discovered that Rebecca Stone had been in communication with a real estate developer who was interested in purchasing the property and converting it to luxury condominiums. The developer had specifically mentioned that the handicapped parking spaces were an inefficient use of prime real estate and had suggested ways to reduce the disabled population in the community. The backlash was swift and severe. Within hours of the story airing, the HOA was flooded with angry calls and emails from around the country. Protesters began gathering outside the community gates, holding signs reading, "Disability rights are human rights," and "Shame on Meadowbrook Commons." The story was shared thousands of times on social media, with many users expressing shock and outrage at the HOA's actions. Rebecca Stone, who had been confident and aggressive throughout the conflict, suddenly became unavailable for comment. Karen Mueller, facing death threats and protests outside her home, resigned from her position and left the community. Dr. Webb's medical license was placed under investigation by the State Medical Board. The legal pressure was equally intense. Jessica Martinez had been joined by two other major disability rights organizations, and the lawsuit had grown to include federal civil rights violations and requests for punitive damages. The HOA's insurance company, faced with the prospect of a costly trial and certain defeat, began pushing for a settlement. But the residents weren't interested in a quiet settlement. They wanted public vindication and systemic change. Maria, who had become the unofficial spokesperson for the group, held a press conference in the community center's parking lot. "We're not just fighting for ourselves," she said, standing with Tom Rodriguez and David Chen beside her. We're fighting for every disabled person who has been discriminated against, harassed, or made to feel unwelcome in their own neighborhood. This case is about more than parking spaces. It's about dignity, respect, and the right to live without fear. The climax came during a dramatic court hearing, where Jessica Martinez presented evidence of the HOA's discriminatory practices. The courtroom was packed with supporters, reporters, and legal observers. Rebecca Stone, representing the HOA, looked uncomfortable as she sat at the defendant's table, her earlier confidence replaced by obvious anxiety. The judge, the Honorable Patricia Williams, listened to the evidence with growing disapproval. When Karen Mueller was called to testify, her evasive answers and obvious discomfort made it clear that she had acted without proper authority and with discriminatory intent. Ms. Mueller, Jessica Martinez said during cross-examination, when you decided that Mrs. Patterson's hip replacement didn't constitute a legitimate disability, what medical training did you rely on? I used my best judgment. Your best judgment. You have no medical training, no certification in disability evaluation, and no legal authority to override state-issued handicapped permits. Is that correct? I was following the HOA's directives. Directives that violated federal law, correct? Karen Miller's attorney objected. But the damage was done. The testimony revealed a pattern of deliberate discrimination, motivated by prejudice and financial considerations rather than legitimate community concerns. Dr. Webb's testimony was even more damaging. Under oath, he admitted that he had never actually examined any of the residents he was supposed to assess. His evaluation process consisted of observing them from a distance and making subjective judgments about their mobility. He also revealed that he had been promised a bonus payment for each resident he deemed not disabled enough to warrant parking accommodations. The most powerful testimony came from the residents themselves. Maria took the stand and described the daily impact of the HOA's actions on her life. She spoke about the pain of walking long distances, the humiliation of being photographed and questioned about her disability, and the fear of losing her home because of mounting fines. I've lived with chronic pain for 8 years, she said, her voice strong despite her emotions. I've learned to manage it, to work around it, to maintain my independence despite it. But what I couldn't manage was the hatred and discrimination I faced in my own neighborhood. That pain was worse than anything my injury ever caused. David Chen's testimony was equally compelling. He described the impact of losing his van, the isolation he felt when he couldn't leave his home, and the financial burden of the assessment requirements and fines. I served my country, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I never expected to come home and have to fight for the right to park in my own neighborhood. Judge Williams didn't deliberate long. Her ruling was swift and comprehensive, finding that the HOA had violated multiple federal and state laws in their treatment of disabled residents. She ordered the immediate restoration of all handicapped parking spaces, the dismissal of all fines and citations, and the implementation of new policies to prevent future discrimination. But the judge went further than anyone had expected. She ordered the HOA to pay damages to each affected resident, to fund disability rights training for all board members, and to establish a permanent disability advocacy position within the HOA structure. She also referred the case to federal prosecutors for potential criminal charges related to civil rights violations. The actions of this HOA represent everything that is wrong with discrimination against disabled individuals. Judge Williams said in her ruling, "They have violated not just the law, but the basic principles of human dignity and respect. This court will not tolerate such behavior, and neither should society." The celebration that evening was held in the community center's main room, on the ground floor where everyone could attend. For the first time in months, the disabled residents felt like they belonged in their own neighborhood. The handicapped parking symbols had been repainted with fresh blue paint, and several new accommodations had been added, including accessible pathways and improved lighting. Maria sat with David, Tom, and Mrs. Patterson, watching as their neighbors celebrated the victory. The financial settlement would help with the medical bills and lost wages they had incurred during the fight. But the real victory was something more intangible, the knowledge that they had stood up for themselves and won. "We did it," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice filled with wonder. "We actually did it." "We did more than that," Tom replied. "We changed things, not just for us, but for everyone who comes after us." The story of Meadowbrook Commons became a landmark case in disability rights law, cited in legal textbooks, and referenced in subsequent court decisions. Jessica Martinez went on to establish a national organization dedicated to fighting housing discrimination against disabled individuals, funded in part by the settlement from the case. Rebecca Stone resigned from the HOA board and left the community, selling her townhouse at a loss. Karen Mueller faced federal charges for civil rights violations and was eventually convicted and sentenced to community service and probation. Dr. Webb lost his medical license and was barred from conducting disability evaluations. But the most lasting change was in the community itself. The new HOA board, elected with full accessibility accommodations, included 3 disabled residents. They implemented comprehensive anti-discrimination policies and established programs to educate residents about disability rights and inclusion. A year later, Maria stood in the same parking lot where she had found that first orange ticket. The handicapped parking spaces were clearly marked and well-maintained, and she had never again been questioned about her right to use them. The community had installed new benches and rest areas, making it easier for all residents to navigate the common areas. David's van was parked in its usual spot, and he had returned to work full-time. Mrs. Patterson had started a support group for disabled residents, meeting monthly in the Accessible Community Center. Tom Rodriguez had been elected to the City Council, where he was working on broader disability rights legislation. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, but there was nothing ominous about them now. They were simply the shadows of a new day, in a community that had learned to embrace all of its residents with dignity and respect. As Maria walked to her car, she thought about the journey that had brought them to this point. It had been painful, exhausting, and sometimes terrifying. But it had also been necessary. They had fought not just for parking spaces, but for the fundamental right to exist in their own community without fear or shame. The orange ticket was gone, replaced by something far more valuable: the knowledge that justice, when fought for with courage and determination, could indeed roll forward like a mighty stream. And, in the quiet suburbs of Meadowbrook Commons, where the morning light fell equally on all residents, that stream continued to flow, carrying with it the promise of a more inclusive and compassionate world. The victory had cost them months of stress, thousands of dollars in legal fees, and countless hours of organizing and advocacy. But it had also taught them something invaluable: that ordinary people, when faced with extraordinary injustice, could rise to meet the challenge and create lasting change. Maria climbed into her car and drove toward the elementary school where she worked, ready to face another day with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you have fought the good fight and won. Behind her, the community center's accessible entrance gleamed in the morning sun, a testament to the power of solidarity and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The battle for Meadowbrook Commons was over, but the war for dignity and inclusion continued. And, in communities across the country, other disabled residents would draw strength from their story, knowing that justice was possible and that no one had to face discrimination alone. The road ahead was long, but it was accessible now, marked with clear signs and free from the barriers that had once seemed insurmountable. And as Maria drove toward her future, she carried with her the unshakable belief that every person deserved to live with dignity, respect, and hope. In the end, they had won more than a lawsuit. They had won the right to belong, to thrive, and to live without fear in their own community. And that victory, hard-fought and well-earned, would echo through the years to come, inspiring others to stand up, speak out, and never surrender in the face of injustice. The orange tickets were gone forever, replaced by the enduring symbol of justice, triumphant a community where every resident, regardless of ability, could park their car, walk to their door, and know they were home.